Evil is real. That's the theme we address here on the Playing with Fire podcast, and today's show is a little bit different. I say that a lot because we're doing some different things this season, but today's show is truly unique. We are going to be talking with Guy and Tana Miller. Now, Guy and Tana are a husband and wife. They are pastors, and they have been working in a very interesting field for quite some time. Now, currently, they are preaching and ministering in Vermont, but before Vermont, they were in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, if you're not familiar with Salem, Salem is the home to the Salem witch trials. It's also a place where there are a lot of different spiritual practices. You'll find Satanists, you'll find Wiccans, you'll find witchcraft, and a whole lot more in Salem. And Guy and Tana, they had a unique experience. They spent years ministering as Christian pastors to the people living in Salem, living side by side with some intriguing people, and really having quite a fascinating experience. So today on the Playing with Fire podcast, we are going to be talking with Guy and Tana about what it was like to minister in Salem, what they learned along the way, and some interesting lessons we can take away when it comes to dealing with people who might be involved with the occult. With no further ado, let's welcome Guy and Tana to the Playing with Fire podcast. Guy and Tana, how you doing today?
So good.
We are fantastic. It's a beautiful day here in the middle of Vermont.
We're here today talking, obviously, about some of the work that you did before Vermont and really fascinating ministry work. And I want to get into that. And the work that you were doing was in Salem, Massachusetts. And I guess I'll start with you, Guy. If you want to sort of take us through, before coming to Vermont, what was your ministry in Salem?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking the question. I think, I have to start with, we were a church plant from a parent church, Calvary Christian Church in Lynnfield, Massachusetts. And my wife and I were there for a long time. Fantastic church. And we were church plant number 3. And so Calvary Christian Church, Pastor Tim Schmidt, sent us out of the church. We actually started with about 50 people and a year's salary. And we were a church plant from them. And the church was only about 5 miles away, 6 miles away. And so we started out of that church with, like I said, with about 50 people. And we started. At first, Salem was just a whisper, just a dream kind of thing. I was right next door, and I had thought that surely there must be a lot of thriving ministries in Salem. I was shocked to find out that, in my denomination anyway, there were none. And then there was only a couple of, very small but faithful outreaches going on. And so there wasn't a lot of evangelical, and to me that's a good word. I know it's a bad word to some people.
It's a good word to me too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there was not a lot of evangelical witness in Salem, and I was blown away. And the gospel witness that was there was marred by extremists who were preaching hate and all kinds of things like that. So my wife and I began to pray, and if you want more on that, we can circle around, but I'll skip that whole part of it. But we began to pray, and we launched a church actually the weekend of September 9th, 2011. And we started our church then with 50 people and 2 other younger couples. And we really got off to a great start in the city. Now,
do you mind if I just jump in for a second here?
Sure.
Because I want to make sure, and I don't want to derail this, because I think this part of the story is really important, but I want to make sure people who are listening know and understand. I think most people do. Salem, for a lot of outsiders, is a place where, you know, at Halloween time, people are flocking there, and people always say, I want to go there and visit because it's this place where there's a lot of spiritual activity going on. And obviously it's known for the witch trials, and, you know, there's a whole history there of things that people know Salem for. And so when you were saying, Guy, that you thought, oh, there's probably all these thriving ministries there, I would assume that too. I've actually been intrigued doing research. I was so happy to find you guys, having been there, but that there weren't as many as I thought, you know, at least doing research and looking from the outside. Is there anything, Tana, just before Guy continues there, that you would want to add just about maybe the state of Salem, what it's like spiritually?
Yeah, I would love to add something. The first thing that comes to my mind is when my kids were little and in strollers. They're married now. But when they were in strollers, I remember one day, Guy was working and schooling full time, and I took the kids. I decided, well, I'm going to check out Salem. So I put the kids in strollers, and I went over to Salem, and literally lasted 5 minutes because the kids were scared. I mean, it was just a crazy time that I went over there, and they were seeing really scary things, just, you know, in windows and stuff like that. So I left. So, you know, when Guy approached me about Salem before 2011, I didn't want to be a church planter as it was, because we were in our mid 40s, and most church planters are in their, you know, late 20s, early 30s ish. And we were, I think, about 45, 43. And honestly, I was scared to be a church planter. And then when he mentioned Salem, that was like, whoa. And I really believe with all my heart, you know, we began to pray about it, and God clearly spoke to us to go into Salem. Even me, I was literally along the highway. I pulled off the highway and started crying because God was just speaking so clearly to me that it was his will. And, you know, sometimes his will isn't really exactly what we might want to do, but how powerful when we actually do it. So we're so happy, and we fell in love with Salem, honestly.
So, you know, as you guys were going through this, and if you want to pick back up, Guy, you can, but as you were, you know, making this decision, you're feeling prompted to do this. You said you started the church with 50 people. How did you go about actually beginning to minister in that environment?
Yeah, well, I can relate one very clear story, because the church, that Remix Church, that was you know, the name of our church, Remix, which was same gospel, different sound, because we wanted it to sound different than the seasonal preachers that would come in. And you know, you could Google these videos of these preachers that come in October, the street preachers, and just cause a lot of problems. But we wanted the same gospel, but we just felt that everywhere we turned, that church had a bad taste in the city's mouth, and they didn't really like the church being there. And so we determined from the get-go that it was going to be the same gospel, because we weren't going to compromise that, but we wanted it to sound different. And our tagline was a creative expression of grace. And we really wanted to be integrated and incarnated into the community. I'll be honest with you, Billy, you know, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm very introverted, but I knew that if I was going to stand up in the pulpit and tell my people, you know, hey, you got to get out there and make friends, and that I had to start doing it. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anybody in Salem. So I said, well, what do I like to do? You know, I like coffee. So I went and found a coffee shop, and I visited every day. And I just started to get to know the baristas and the people that came in. And there was a guy that came in. I can say his name. He's a good friend. He's a good guy, John Andrews. Does a lot for the city, and have nothing but great things to say about him. Well, he was hanging his art on the walls at the coffee house. And you know, I'm just sitting there sipping my cappuccino, and I really just felt the Spirit of God say, you know, buy this guy's art. And you know, nothing against John. You know, I didn't really like so much of what was going on the walls, but it was just a God thing. So he was putting it up there, and I went up to him and told him I was going to buy $500 worth of his art. And he was blown away, and that started a friendship. And it turned out this guy, John Andrews, practically gave me the keys to the city. You know, he's the kind of guy that knew everybody, knew everything, got me connected, got us connected, and we were off and running. And so that's how I started it, at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
You know, as you're talking about this, it's so interesting to kind of hear. First of all, it's a bold thing to go into a place like Salem. I love that you mentioned your kids being, well, I don't love that they were scared, but mentioning that environment, right? The kids see they're scared and you're apprehensive, but you go in, you trust God. How real, Tana, is all of this? And before you answer, when I say real, we've had a number of people on the podcast who have talked about coming from, witchcraft, who they've come from these backgrounds, these pagan backgrounds, and they found Jesus and they've had these amazing stories. And when it comes to Salem, there are a lot of witchcraft shops. It's very much an environment of this spiritualism. How real is all of this, and how dangerous is all of this to believers? And then I really want to get into sort of the ministry, but I want to frame that a little bit because I think people have a lot of skepticism and they're not sure they understand it.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's not dangerous to us because we have the power of our testimonies and the blood of Jesus, obviously.
Amen.
But I think if you're spirit filled and you walk into a witch shop, you're going to know right away if it's there for marketing or if it's definitely legit. You're just going to know. You're going to feel it. I think anybody would who has relationship with God. But in Guy and I, in our own personal life, I think it was the first time ever in ministry that we really felt it. I don't know how to say it any other way. But there were times when, another thing about Guy and I, we're not your cookie cutter pastors. Like, I had walked around the city with some women who were incredible women who loved God, and I would bring them into different shops and everything, and they literally would turn around and leave just because they walked in and there was, witchcraft stuff in the shop. And Guy and I are just not that way. We wanted to get to know everyone in the city. We wanted to meet everyone and love on everyone and get to know people personally, regardless of what they believed in. And that isn't just with the witchcraft and witch shops, which are everywhere. That was also with the LGBTQ community. So it's definitely real. It's out there. It's nothing we have to be afraid of. But I think that you definitely have to be wise and you have to be on guard, because there's times when, and Guy and I used to talk about it, after we had been in the city and actually lived in the city for 3 or 4 years, I remember we had a team come to stay with us for a week we were the charging station for haunted happenings. Our church used to run the charging station so people could come charge their phones in our warm space with live music and all that. And so I remember there was a team that came and one of the girls literally had an anxiety attack. And I think Guy and I were so used to it. We just were kind of immune to it. Sometimes you live there for so long, you're so used to it. It doesn't really affect you like those coming in. So I don't know how to explain that. It is real. There's some that's just marketing, and then there's some that's real. And I think I don't know. I don't even know how to end what I'm going to say here, but it was just, it's something you got to be on guard, regardless of the fact that you get immune to it. You do have to be on guard.
Yeah, I was telling Guy when we talked before, recording this episode, that I had one experience in Salem. I'd only been there once, and I was in one of those shops and didn't really understand what I was doing or where, I was young. And I remember the woman who owned it talking to us about what she did, and I remember thinking, oh, this is not what I thought it was. And she kept talking about the energy. Do you feel the energy in the room? And it was a very heavy experience. And I remember it still very clearly.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I haven't had a lot of experiences like that. So speaking of heavy experiences, as you guys are going into this ministry, you're doing some unconventional, really interesting things to reach people. Guy, what were some of the relationships that were forged? Who were some of these people who you guys were able to interact with and, form those relationships with?
Well, just trying to think what names to say, what not to say. Well, Gigi Gill is the Duchess of Salem. This is a transvestite. His name's Gary. She is the head of the Pride Parade and kind of like a celebrity in town. Um, just a wonderful human being, to be honest with you. We had I'd be lying if I said we were good friends, but we had a friendship, and Gigi was at all the Salem was just always happening, always busy, always something going on. It was awesome. And so Gigi is like the queen of it all. And whenever we saw her, we'd try to bring her coffee because she would stand there and wave all day. So that was a very interesting friendship that we had. We also got to befriend a young man who identified as a merman. That was also a very interesting and out of the box experience.
Was that a legitimate, did this person, and feel free to, you don't have to, use any names you're comfortable with, feel free to use descriptors too, but for this individual, did they really believe that they were that? I mean, I'm just curious, was it an act or did they believe it?
Well, no, I mean, they knew they were a human being,
Okay.
but they just chose to, like if you were to visit their website and everything, he was raised by Mer people, and that's kind of like just what he did. Like that would be in the whole, gender identity crisis that
he grew up with.
Our nation's facing. That's how he chooses to identify.
Wow. Interesting.
So that was something. And of course, one of the first things we did was we got to know the mayor. Now, another whole side thing here, which we don't have to get into, but what helped us get a lot of open doors was that in 2013, our daughter finished in the top 3 in American Idol. And so we had a lot of that opened up a lot of doors. And so we basically got to know all of the celebrities of Salem in terms of political, music, art. I also had the privilege, and I do mean that, the privilege of meeting Christian Day, who's one of the top warlocks in America. He started in Salem, and I think he's since moved out. He lives in Baton Rouge, but he comes up every October to do the Witches Circle, which is a fascinating discussion too. He does that in October. And so, and we got to know just a lot of great all business owners. I worked a part-time job at a bookstore just to meet people, and we got to know a lot of great people. That was our whole mission.
Mm-hmm.
What was the tension? Was there tension in this? I mean, it's almost a silly question. You've got this clash of worldviews, and you've got what we see in Ephesians 6, right? This battle that goes on. It's not between people, it's between good and evil in a realm that we are not necessarily seeing, but we may feel the results of that. How did you navigate? I'm not even going to ask if there was tension. I'm sure there was. How did you navigate that, Tana, when it came to just, were there tense moments with some of these people where you're sharing and they're sharing, and it's very clearly a worldview clash?
Yeah. You know how we handled that? Unconditional love. And so I was mostly zooming in on, the community of women around me, because I love women's ministry and stuff like that. And we ended up with my dear friend Penny Cabot and her mother Lori Cabot. Lori's the official witch of Salem. They ended up being our next door neighbors, which was a really cool story in and of itself. But Penny, her daughter, and I are approximately around the same age, and we used to just hang out as she stood out and smoked. And, we were a lot alike. We both did essential oils. I did doTERRA oils. And, we had all kinds of common ground. We like to paint rocks together. Befriending people and not being afraid, because there's no need to be afraid. And the great thing is Penny and I respect, even to this day, we text each other. I respect what she believes. I'll never believe it. She respects what I believe, and she'll never believe it. But the cool thing is witches and Christians can be friends. But I think a lot of Christians are so judgmental and so scared of it that, they back off or whatever. And, that's not what Jesus would have done. And so this is, I think, a little bit how I think I are a little out of the box, because there's a lot of Christians who get really scared. And I've brought people into the city. And like I said, I've had friends literally just walk out of places when there's opportunity right in front of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and you would assume that a place, and I don't want to oversimplify, right? Because there's a history and there's a lot that's happened in Salem, but that a place ends up in that spiritual condition when people don't engage over time and when there isn't interaction going on. I mean, I would, that's always sort of been my, my assumption. And I know again, I don't want to oversimplify it. Guy, feel free to respond to that, but I'm curious what you think on that.
Yeah, there was witness, but I think the problem is that it was the wrong kind of witness. For instance, when we were looking for a place to meet, to have our church services, we ended up at a school. The first time we approached the school system about using, a school auditorium, we were told emphatically no, because previously a church that was using a school brought an evangelist in, and they basically went on a witch hunt. And the city found out about it and vowed that they would never let a church use a school again. So we were the first ones in like 12 or 15 years to be able to use a school. So there was witness, and it was just the wrong kind. People feel like, to reach Salem, they think they're doing it a favor by coming in one weekend or 2 or 4 weekends a year in October and, preaching, God hates witches and God hates gays and doing all. They think they're helping out, and they're causing just a firestorm for the people that are actually there 12 months a year trying to minister.
Yeah, and when you think about, and I just want to return to this, and I love what you said, Tana, too, about not being afraid as Christians, because we don't have to be afraid when we're living a Christian life and we have the Holy Spirit and we have that protection. We don't need to be afraid of evil, right? We obviously don't engage in witchcraft and evil, but we don't have to be afraid of those who do. How real is this in the minds of those who practice? And when I say how real is it, I mean, do they feel that they have power? And have you seen any of that sort of thing manifest in any way? That's a question a lot of people have. Is this something that people they're sort of turning to this stuff and it's just not real, but they believe it is? Or is there something there that's tangible when it comes to those who engage in these practices?
I just want to be really careful how I answer this, but it it definitely is real. There's definitely things that happen. I do have some stories, but I don't want to tell them. But um, I will say that regardless of how Guy and I ministered and the way we ministered, I'm not going to say we never felt it. There were times that I think this was the first time in our ministry lives when I would wake up in the middle of the night, and sometimes Guy too, and just really feel an evil, you know what I mean? And have to pray it through, kind of thing. As far as the people in the city, there was a group that did a lot of different things that I believe there were true manifestations that happened. And regardless of if I believed in what they were doing, or obviously I didn't, but it's kind of like you have to befriend these people, and you have to love on them regardless of what they're doing, else who's ever going to shine the light to them? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
Billy, can I jump in?
absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that, I feel like you kind of asked the question a couple times. I want to try to put a fine point on it in terms of this, religious experience in Salem, and what's happening is that you have to understand that there is, Wicca is very popular in Salem. And it at first blush, Wicca, to me, I just call it a really crunchy granola kind of religion, where it's kind of like, hey, let's just all get along, be nice, send out good vibes, and Mother Nature takes care of us. And in a sense, there's a harmlessness there of like, hey, can't we all just get along? And that's part of Wicca, and I think that's the part that a lot of people gravitate towards, is the good karma kind of thing. Just they don't really believe deeply like this is a life altering force, but they just want to be nice. They want to get along, but they don't want to do it with any kind of commandments, or certainly with a savior, but they want to be nice. And that's really prevalent, and so there's a lot of nice people in Salem, but below that, there is this sorcery and witchcraft But it is, to be honest with you, that stuff, the deep, dark, black stuff is really underground. And we were there 10 years, and I never really got to rub shoulders with anybody who was deeply into that kind of stuff. It's super underground. And to be honest with you, you know, Salem is you know, witchcraft city, witch city, 11 1 month of the year. The 11 months, it is full of, you know, American history and art and music and all other kinds of wonderful things. So it's really just that 1 month, and they get all the money. The city gets all the money they need in that 1 month because they have 1 million people come in.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just economy. It's just, hey, let's have a store that sells Harry Potter wands. And we laugh at that, like, well, who in the right mind thinks of that? Well, tourists do.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other year-long shops where you can go in and you can get all the ingredients and help that you need to begin to have a spell book to actually cast these spells on other people.
You know, yeah, and I appreciate you answering that because, yeah, and it's the reason I asked it a couple of times is because it's the thing that people want to know, and I feel like you
Right.
both explained it so well. You know that there are different levels of this too, and one of the things, and I need to do an episode on this, so listeners, you know, it will be coming, but is Satanism? There's so much confusion about Satanism because you have the Satanists who, you know, the Church of Satan, which is basically an atheist organization that doesn't even really believe in Satan. And that's the one that gets a lot of headlines. And then you have actual people who do worship Satan, right? And so there's a lot of confusion in trying to delineate that. Was there a big population of either of those groups in Salem?
Well, interestingly enough, the worldwide headquarters of the Satanic Temple was about a quarter mile from our home and about a half mile from our church.
Oh, wow.
And what they had there was they had the Baphomet statue. It's pretty famous. It's actually it's wrapped up in legalities now because they wanted to post it somewhere. I think in Little Rock, Arkansas. They wanted to put it on a city green, and I don't know. It's in the court system, but they have the Baphomet statue there, and they charge you to go look at it. And so Tana and I, you know, we thought hard about it, and you know, we went into the Satanic Temple, and again, I know there's probably be some viewers that are probably like, "What? That's crazy!" But we figure, well, this is our city, and we want to know what's going on. And so,
let me just press a pause. I know that they knew who we were when we walked in, so they had done their homework.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we go in there. We didn't know what to expect, right? You just picturing, and so what you didn't see was actually like their sanctuary, so to speak. What it was, Billy, was so crazy. This was the darkest experience of all my years there. It was an art gallery, and in this art gallery, you would have, for instance, a Jesus who was half man, half merman, crucified to the cross, screaming out in pain. You would have, and sorry, I'll try. I don't want to make this explicit, but you would have Jesus and a goat in a sexual position, you know, as a sculpture, and you'd have that kind of art. And when I walked into that art gallery, that was to me like the darkest, most evil thing that I experienced there.
I literally got physically sick and had to leave the room.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, so you have this spiritual environment. You guys are there, you're doing work. Now, I'd love to talk about what you saw. I mean, how likely was it for you to be able to minister in a way? Obviously, we're always planting seeds. And so whether or not anybody ever accepts the gospel and moves forward, we're always planting the seed. But was it often that you saw people respond to the gospel while you were there?
Well, I want to put a caveat, not a caveat, but I wanted to explain to you that when we planted Remix, our goal was not to reach the witchcraft community. There was another ministry, I think, you know, Bill, you and I talked about it off air, that was attempting to minister to that. And so we did not start Remix Church with the primary focus of, hey, we're going to reach this community, because it's such a small part of what's really happening in Salem. And so we did not put a lot of resource or time into getting into these witch shops and getting to talk to the warlocks and the witches. And it was not an emphasis for us. So I don't think in our 10 years of ministry there, we saw any of that particular community come to the gospel.
No. But there was extremely a lot of seeds planted, for sure.
Yeah. And so talk a little bit more about that mission too, because I think that's really interesting. I mean, in a place like Salem, if I were going in, you go with where God's leading you, but I would almost, it would be really interesting to try to rally the people there who are maybe agnostic or who are questioning. They're not part of those communities, but strengthening that sort of core of the faith there. But talk a little bit about what you guys were aiming to do there.
Well, I mean, again, I'll say the word unconditional love. So whatever we came across, and we did come across, which is, even though it wasn't our main focus, whoever, and put it this way, if you were to go into the city now and you were to talk to the LGBTQ community or the mayor or Gigi Gill or any influential person in the city, and you were to mention Remix Church in Salem, they all had a relationship with us, and they all loved us. And some Christians, I think, would not think that's a good thing. But in my heart, we succeeded greatly because of that, because we showed the unconditional love of Jesus Christ, regardless of what we believed. And then they knew firmly what we believed in and still respected us for it. I believe that whole time we were there, that God had placed us in Salem to plant seeds. And I have the permission of Sterling and Kendra Key to say this. Sterling and Kendra Key are a couple that did the original church plant with us. And now they're feeling a call to go back into the city. They're a young couple. I think they're in their late 20s. They have the energy for it, and they have a passion. They're probably the only other couple that I know that loves that city more, about equal to us, But they're going to be going back into the city, and Kendra and I talk all the time, and, we're praying for them. But I believe that Jesus used us to plant the seeds, and that God's going to use them to harvest. We loved unconditionally. We planted seeds. Our church had a great name in that city. And I just believe with all my heart, I have to believe that the people that came to know the Lord in our church, are still walking with him. And, there were very difficult, strange times. Like, for instance, what if a guy walks into your church dressed like a girl, and he's a very sexy girl, who counsels him, who sits with him and has coffee with him, Guy or I, So Guy and I have to literally talk about that and decide who's going to have coffee with this person. And most of the time, if it looked like a sexy girl, I had coffee and listened. We wanted to hear people's stories. And I think a lot of Christians turn their nose up at a transsexual or someone who lives a different kind of lifestyle because they're uncomfortable. And Jesus wants us to sit and hear their stories, because there might be a really good reason that they're the way they are. And, I loved hearing people's stories and planting seeds all along the way. And that's what we did for all the years that we were there, taking the time to be with people who were not like us.
So our approach, what you're asking about, our approach to ministry, it wasn't so much geared towards this community, but basically how churches, we developed our church calendar and our church activities around what Salem was doing. Because like I said, there's always festivals and parades and all this kind of stuff that's going on all year long. And so we just kind of did what Salem did and showed up and helped out with activities and things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what a fascinating case study in understanding unique ministry opportunities. Because I think a lot of people, maybe even people listening, might be in cities that maybe are in Salem, but they have, I mean, I live just outside of New York City, and in my community, there aren't a lot of Christians that we know of, right? There are, there's a few churches that are scripturally sound, but it's really easy to, get jaded by that or not understand, well, how do I reach out to people in this community? And so I think hearing your story here is, is really helpful. And there's something else I just it's been sort of an undercurrent in all of this that I think is really interesting in the times that we're living in, as difficult as it is for people, the gender crisis. I mean, there are 4,500 crises going on at the same time right now, spiritually for people in this country. And there's a lot of us versus them. And what you guys are saying is that your experience was that even if people knew where you stood, they understood where you stood on faith, on issues, that you guys were able to listen and love them still.
Yes.
And you guys were, it sounds like, agree to disagree in a sense, right? But find a relationship. Can you just speak to that a little bit more? Because I think there's a great lesson there for people. I really do.
Well, the key was, yeah, I mean, just to as I preached all the time at Remix, don't look at people like a potential convert. Be a friend first. And the reason why, the city of Salem loved working with us is that we helped out. We gave money to events. We provided staff at events, and so I find that, working with whoever we were working with in Salem, that, they didn't have our worldview, but they sure appreciated someone helping out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's honestly, Bill, it's almost as simple as that. It's almost as simple as just help out, and people will listen to what you have to say, and they'll respect what you have to say. We had there's so many events and stuff that Tana and I could tell you about to illustrate the point. One of which is that we had a great sanctuary. We were in a strip mall right downtown, right in the middle of everything. And we put a good amount of money into our sanctuary with lighting and sound and all that kind of stuff. And so we had these events that would happen in our sanctuary, like in October. It was like Edgar Allan Poe. This guy would come in and dress up and read Edgar Allan Poe poems. And another one was Sleepy Hollow and stuff like that. And we would offer our sanctuary for those kinds of events. And we would have a sanctuary full of unbelievers. I'm like, to me, that was a great success. And so I was able to get up there and be like, hey, I'm Pastor Guy. Thanks for being here today. I'd make a joke about, hey, I appreciate y'all coming to our nursery staff training, and stuff like that. And, but, I got in 1 minute, I got a chance to, share the gospel. This is who we are. And, so we just did a lot of things like that. It was one time there's a lot of bars in Salem. It's one of the most alcoholic cities in Massachusetts, meaning the amount of bars per capita. And so what we did is we would, this one particular place had a bar downstairs. We bought it out for the evening and provided live music, not necessarily Christian music, but just kind of neutral music. And
Tell them what you mean by buying out the bar.
Yeah, well, we just said close down the bar for the night and just serve non-alcoholic stuff, and we're going to have a party down here with music. And so we did those kinds of things. And so that was just an example of what you were saying. You were asking about, like, doing stuff with people that may not necessarily we don't agree with, but we're going to help out, and people are going to be okay with that.
So as we sort of round out the conversation here, Tana, what was it that led you guys out of the city, and what was that process? Was it tough to leave? I'm just curious of your exodus from Salem.
I personally was burnt out. Like I said, by the time we left, we were in our early 50s, Guy, were we? Mm-hmm. And personally, I was burnt out, me. But at the same time, we absolutely loved the city. It was a struggle. I mean, in the month of October, our church people had to pay $30 to park to come to church. The month of October was absolutely insane, but there was so many different things. I don't know, Guy, why don't you answer this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had a church planters and anointing, and we planted the church, and we just felt that it was we thought for sure somebody else would come in and pick it up and run with it. Hindsight's always 2020, right? And had we known,
and we know COVID was going to hit too.
Yeah, that happened like the month after we left, and but ultimately it's all, we're trusting the leading of the Spirit. But I mean, I definitely wouldn't have left if I didn't think anybody would, no,
Pick
no
it
one,
up.
no one
Yeah.
was going to take
There
us.
was a man who interim stayed for about 9 months and tried to get some couple to come in. But
Yeah, they had to go almost, I think, 6, 7 months without meeting. Salem was really strict with COVID regulations, but it was a tough emotional decision, Billy. To be honest with you, it was very hard to leave, but I guess we just knew it was right, and it didn't feel right for the past 2 years because, as I told you, Remix Church is not there anymore, and I personally struggled with a lot of feelings like that about being a failure and such, but we're blessed here. God is blessing our ministry here, and now knowing that there is indeed a couple that we know who's going to go back into Salem is just
we're
tremendous.
thrilled, and they love the city just as much as we do. So we're really, really excited and going to back them up 100%, Sterling and Kendra.
I guess my closing thing is that it's tough to leave, but I guess if there's any pastors listening to this, when it's time to leave and you don't leave, you just cause more problems.
Yeah. No, that's true. And let me just ask you one final thing, if you don't mind, both of you. There may be people who are listening and who they maybe know people who are engaged in the occult, or they're involved in things that make them uncomfortable as believers, right? Knowing what Scripture says about these things, but that uncomfortableness makes them maybe not engage with those people, not communicate with them.
Right.
And I'll just throw it to you. First, Guy, but what would you say to those people based on what you learned in Salem?
You're talking about what would if somebody has a friend who's, say, involved in witchcraft or Wicca, like.
Yeah, and they're struggling to engage with them. They're feeling, maybe they're pulling away from people, or they're not engaging with those they know who are engaged in these things because they have a fear maybe of it.
Yeah. Well, I would just echo what Tana said earlier, is that you just have to know that God isn't threatened by this. God isn't threatened by palm reading and tarot cards and crystals and candles and spells. God's not intimidated by this at all. And the Holy Spirit is up to the task. And so that's the first thing I would say, is that, you referenced Ephesians 6 earlier. That doesn't present spiritual warfare as something like, oh, what if we lose? Because we don't. So I think, that would be one thing, is just to know that God's not threatened by it, and you can walk boldly into it. You're not going to understand it all. You don't have to understand what all their Wicca and witchcraft beliefs to talk to them. You know what I mean? So I would just say that, don't be afraid to have the conversation, because I found that when you get into a serious conversation with folks that are in Wicca, and you talk about their spells, and you start talking about, if you can get them to talk about that enough, they'll see the light. And what they need to see more than anything is the love of a Savior, and that's going to come through us.
Yeah, I became such good friends with two ladies that they actually wanted to be honored to have me sit so they could my palms. So that was a little uncomfortable kind of situation where, that's when I had to stand up and say, this, I don't believe in it, and I hope you respect that. And they did. They respected that. So it's hard getting close to people, not just witches, but other people in Salem, when there is going to be a breaking point where you have to say, you know what, I can't engage in that. I can't do that. But I also just wanted to say to you, Billy, that I think Guy and I, you keep asking about like the demonic and stuff like that. And, I think we saw more demon possession and demonic stuff in our ministry on Cape Cod than we saw in Salem. So it's anywhere. I mean, it's anywhere and everywhere. The enemy is strategic and wants to plan things out. And, for people, the one thing I'd say to ladies, if they want to minister and their husbands aren't around or whatever, double up. It's like, you have a pencil and you try to make the pencil stand on the table and it's not going to stand, but you wrap a ton of other pencils around it and put a rubber band around it, and it's going to stand. For everybody, I'd say double up, because, two people powerful, the word of God says, than one. So I mean, you need a team. You need a prayer team. It's very important. And yeah.
I so appreciate you both talking about this today. It's so interesting. It gives a lens into a really unique, I think, ministry that most people probably haven't thought about or heard about. And so I just appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking.
Yeah, Billy, and we appreciate it too. And I really hope in time that you can contact Sterling and Kendra and also do an interview with them as they head into Salem.
Absolutely. I would love that.
I want to give one positive plug for Salem that a lot of people don't know. The very first missionary to leave the shores of America left from Salem Harbor. And so the very first missionary came out of Salem. So God's not done there.
That was Guy and Tana Miller. Really interesting perspective. They've left us with a lot to think about. And, I want to hear from you guys. Do you love the show? If you love the show, head over to Apple, head over to Edify, head over to wherever you listen to the show and like the show, rate the show highly, comment about it on social media, let people know, share it with friends and family. There's a lot more coming on the Playing with Fire podcast. And we're going to be doing about 2 episodes a month, bi-weekly. So stay tuned throughout the summer, and we're going to be entering then into the fall and kind of doing some interesting things with a 3rd season in October. I will tell you more details about that as we get closer, but I hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, please rate the show, let everyone you know about it, and hey, reach out to me. Head over to billyhollowell.com. There's a contact form. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to hear. Do you have suggestions for the Playing with Fire podcast? I would be more than open to them. Would love to hear from you, and just want to thank you for listening to the show. And if you want more on this topic, you can get my book, Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. I'll see you very soon.